Down to business.
When he drinks, he thinks.
That's the nectar of the gods, baby.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the #1 liquid-fueled, liquid lubricated show on the interwebs. This is the Whiskey Musings Broadcast. And I am your host, Rick. All right, I've got a smorgasbord of articles to kind of talk about tonight. Some of them are related, others are not, so we'll just go through and get through them like usual. It looks like over on Rumble, Amy is saying happy 12th birthday to her heart girly, Miss Tormenta. Now, if you recall, Miss Tormenta was a pet of the week. Amy's got some absolutely beautiful dogs. And she does shows with them. She does all kinds of events with them and everything else. But, so that is, happy 12th birthday to her. Hopefully she continues and gets a long life after that. Okay. And yes, Daybreak, I do see I owe you a chug of whiskey. You're right. So to that end, tonight I am drinking Buffalo Trace for tonight's whiskey of choice. And just in case anybody missed my Wednesday episode, what Day is talking about is they started a rant chain where everybody was tossing out $5, and I essentially ended up drinking every single time somebody gave me a $5 Rumble rant, and I got a little inebriated. I will admit, I went back and looked at the video, and I could tell toward the end my speech was not as clear as what it normally is, and I could also notice that whenever I would blink, it would take a little bit longer for my eyes to open back up after they closed. I was tipsy. That's true. But the thing that Day is talking about is that at the very, very end, she tossed out a final $5 before I shut down. And so I owe her a drink. I did tell her. So there's my Buffalo Trace. I did tell her I would go ahead and do it. And so here we go. All right. So that was, roughly a third of what I had in my glass. So there you go. There you go, Day. Caught back up. All right. So before we get going on all of tonight's events, let me go ahead and recognize tonight's sponsor, of course, or affiliate, I should say, the Institute on the Constitution. The Institute on the Constitution was established in 2004 as a 501c3 nonprofit with one singular mission: to restore the constitutional republic through grassroots education. All courses and materials are developed using primary source documents and taught from the American view of law and government as defined in the Declaration of Independence in the following 3 key points. 1, there is a God. 2, our rights come from him. And 3, the purpose of civil government is to secure and protect our God-given rights. The IOTC offers the opportunity to educate yourself on our most precious founding document, the Constitution of the United States. They also provide tools to educate your community and get involved with local government. Start by taking their free U.S. Constitution course and go from there. Use my affiliate link, iotc.whiskeymusings.online, to sign up, and while you are there, take a moment to look through the rest of their other course material and information. My affiliate link, once again, is iotc.whiskeymusings.online to get great content and to learn about our historical founding and support the show in the process. That's IOTC, India Oscar Tango Charlie, .whiskeymusings.online. Or if you just want to purchase this fabulous Saddleback leather-bound U.S. Constitution and support the show, go to constitution.whiskeymusings.online. You got to look at this. This is 1/8 of an inch of Saddleback leather. The pages are water resistant, and take a look at this stitching. It goes all the way through the leather and the pages. It has rounded pages for ease of handling and turning. They have a 100-year warranty against defects in materials and workmanship. If something goes wrong with it, you just return it to them, and they will either fix it or replace it during that 100 years. This is just an absolute fantastic value. I think it's being sold for about $19. And so that is just, it's absolutely wonderful. It's buddy tested, buddy approved. It's my youngest Whiskey Warrior fan tested and approved as well. And so go and check out the Institute on the Constitution at iotc.whiskeymusings.online, or go and get you a leatherback or a leather-bound Constitution today. Speaking of that, you may want to have your Constitution on hand, because I'm going to be talking a little bit about it later on in the program. So if you don't have it yet, you may want to go ahead and grab it. So grab it and have it handy and available, because we are going to be talking about that here in just a minute. Okay. Oh, you know what? The one thing that I did forget to do, hang on just a second. I got to grab my, almanac, my Patriot almanac. Okay. So we got the American Patriots Almanac, and what date is today? Today is May. Whoops. Got to get into May here. We're looking at May 6th. This is the one thing that I did not grab to prep for the show. But hey, that's what happens sometimes with live TV, live video. Okay, so let's go ahead and go into our next segment. On this day in American history. All right, and on this day in American history, of course, we read from the American Patriots Almanac, written by William J. Bennett and John T.E. Cribb. This is an absolutely fabulous book. You can go and buy it where books are sold. It is incredible for this. And for tonight is May 6th. And so for tonight, we are going to say, we're going to talk about Bob Hope, who actually was an honorary veteran. One day, comedian Bob Hope got a suggestion from a sponsor: broadcast his popular radio program from March Field, an Army base near or at Riverside, California. Why should we drag the whole show down there? Hope asked, but he consented. And on May 6, 1941, he performed for hundreds of cheering troops. That one show changed his life. He couldn't get out of his mind the appreciative response of the young recruits. 7 months later, Japan attacked Pearl Harbor. Throughout the rest of World War II, with only 2 exceptions, Hope aired his show from U.S. military installations. He went wherever the soldiers were fighting: Europe, North Africa, the Pacific. When the time for recognition of service to the nation in wartime comes to be considered, Bob Hope should be high on the list, John Steinbeck wrote in a newspaper column. He gets laughter wherever he goes from men who need laughter. After the war, Hope became one of America's most popular entertainers and one of its most successful immigrants. His family had emigrated from England when he was a boy, coming through Ellis Island. He never forgot the troops. For more than half a century, through the Cold War, Korean War, Vietnam War, the Persian Gulf War, and times of peace, he led tours around the globe to perform for soldiers. I wouldn't trade it for my entire career, he said. Unless you've actually seen them in action, you have no conception of their courage. Millions watched his televised Christmas shows for the troops. Hope received all kinds of awards for service to country, including the Congressional Gold Medal and the Presidential Medal of Freedom. In 1997, 6 years before his death, Congress made him an honorary veteran. the first time it had ever bestowed such a tribute. Hope said it was the greatest honor he had ever received. That is today's On This Day in American History. Now, I can tell you, I know of someone who has the same level of respect for the troops, who is also a actor and person, of high, let's just call him highly known. Gary Sinise is another gentleman who has high respect for veterans and for the troops. And we also have, several other people as well. Trace Adkins and, a lot of country stars, Toby Keith, they all do that and hang out. And so it's really, really, really cool to understand, to have these entertainers and everything understand what the troops go through when they're in those war time situations and trying to give them some entertainment and give them some pleasure in such a drastically dreary and in some cases even absolutely horrific place. But anyway. All right. So tonight, I want to talk a little bit about Senator Rand Paul has been one of those voices in Congress that in the Senate in particular, but in Congress as a whole, who has really been, he's been focused on Fauci quite a bit, but he also has a calm demeanor in the terms, in the sense of being able to say, you know what, we need to slow down when we're doing stuff. We need to respect what's going on. We need to consider very, very carefully when we're getting ready to make laws. And one of the things, this is a article in the Epoch Times that just came out, that he essentially said where he was talking about the Restrict Act. Now, for those of you that don't know, the Restrict Act is being sold initially to people and to the public as it is designed to essentially block TikTok in the United States. But unfortunately, I think the Restrict Act has actually gone a little bit farther than that. It's not just focused on TikTok, but here, let's jump into the article and I will kind of narrate along the way here. So Rand Paul warns that the Restrict Act would allow the feds to nullify the First Amendment. Now, keep in mind, no, honestly, it wouldn't allow them to nullify. However, the first time that they used the Restrict Act in order to nullify freedom of speech, I think it would eventually end up in front of the Supreme Court. However, this is a bit of a concerning situation when it comes to interpreting how the Restrict Act is written. And so if we read into the piece here, it basically says that Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky has been a major critic of the Restrict Act, which has been sold to Congress and the public as just a ban on TikTok, like I mentioned. He warned that it would authorize the federal government to censor any online communications it deems subversive and would nullify the First Amendment. The popular social media app, meaning TikTok, which is controlled by a Chinese company with ties to the Chinese Communist Party. Let's be honest, what companies over in China don't have ties? But it has more than 150 million monthly users in the United States alone and is used mainly by people under 30. Now, I can tell you for a fact that my daughter keeps saying you need to start putting short videos out on TikTok to catch the younger crowd. And I've been considering it, I'll admit, but only for the purpose of being able to spread the proper word of the United States and Congress and so on and so forth. But back to the piece here. The app has been controversial for years, as concerns over security have led to several statewide bans of the app on government devices. Former President Donald Trump, of course, failed in his attempt to ban TikTok in the United States during his presidency, but momentum is building ever since. Okay. In April, President Joe Biden demanded that TikTok owners divest their stakes in the company or face a nationwide ban. Senator Mark Warner of Virginia and Senator John Thune of South Dakota co-sponsored the Restrict Act, which now has the support of over 20 senators to give the Commerce Department the power to impose restrictions up to and including outright bans on TikTok, and here's the key, and other technologies that may pose a national security risk. Okay, so I'm going to take a second, step back, and just think about this, okay? Let's just take this one step further. So the first things that comes out is that we go and we ban TikTok. Okay, so we already know through many media sources and everything else that TikTok in and of itself is collecting users' information, sometimes collecting it off of phones when they haven't really been given permissions to do so. They are very restrictive in terms of the fact that they go through and they kind of like, what do you say? They kind of scrape through your phone and find things that they probably don't have any business looking at or looking into. But because you accept the user, the acceptable user permissions or the user, the EULA, the end user licensing agreement, they can go ahead and do this. Now, a lot of people have been critical of those EULAs for many, many years when it comes to companies like Microsoft and Apple. There have been a lot of conversations about this, and a lot of this has to deal with the fact that, you know, privacy is a big deal. And I even covered privacy in a earlier episode. I think it was, 6-8 months ago or whatever, where privacy by itself is pretty much dead outside of your own mind. We have so many different things that are going out there. Most people don't even read the EULAs on software anymore. And so you don't necessarily, you don't necessarily know 100% what's in those terms of services. Nobody reads them anymore. We've been conditioned to look at them as just, for the most part, as just, oh, that's just something I have to accept in order to move on and be able to download this app that I really, really want, So, unfortunately, when you don't do that, you can end up in some kind of a legal quagmire when it comes to having the ability to restrict or refuse certain things that this application is going to do within your phone. So this act is basically an attempt to try and, get at TikTok, but because of the fact that they can't necessarily write it for whatever reason, write the ban to be specific against one company, because I can almost guarantee you that company would immediately sue for discrimination under our laws, but they have to write it more in a general sense. Now, from the point of this act, though, I want to kind of point out there was an act that was passed called the Patriot Act back in, just after the towers got hit, 9/11. And everybody had a knee-jerk gut reaction to say, yes, we do need to spy on foreign entities that are here in the United States. And the challenge to that one was the fact that we ended up with things like the FISA courts. Well, as we know now, the FISA courts and that law were manipulated in order to allow for a spying on an incoming president. Okay. So you have to be really, really, really careful when you're doing things like passing blanket laws. Now, especially in today's day and age, because if you think about it, I mean, even like YouTube or, Facebook, and Twitter especially has all been caught censoring conservative speech and conservative outlets, not with the idea that it's for the greater good or that it's a good idea to do this, but literally in order to prevent information from getting out onto the internet and getting into the hands of the people, i.e. the Hunter Biden laptop story, and influencing an election. And so whenever you look at things like this, laws like this, we really have to go beyond just the knee-jerk gut reaction and really understand what it is that we're actually looking to focus on. And one of these things is that it's essentially supposed to be a ban on TikTok, but the fact that they add other technologies that may pose a national security risk. What did we just see here recently? We just saw the Department of Justice call out people who were standing up in front of school boards as terrorists, domestic terrorists, DVEs, domestic violent extremists. And now they're looking at this act potentially being where it would, they say that it would mainly apply to foreign apps and software from countries deemed hostile to the United States, like China, Russia, North Korea, Iran, Venezuela, and Cuba. But we all know that if we give them just a tiny little bit, that they will go and basically take a mile out of this. This is just to get the foothold in, because what'll happen is people will accept this and they'll be like, okay, this is cool, kind of cool. We get it. We don't want to send out national security secrets out to our enemies, our foreign enemies. But at the same time, though, the language in the bill tends to be a little vague. It has to be. But honestly, I mean, again, this really speaks to the libertarian side of someone in terms of, in specific, the often quoted, Ben Franklin quote, and I'm going to paraphrase it here, but the fact that, giving up a little bit of liberty to the benefit of something like security means that you really don't deserve either one. And so, the same thing happens with free speech when people talk about banning hate speech. If you want to ban hate speech under the First Amendment, you can't necessarily do that, because who determines what hate speech actually is? Who determines, in this particular case, if an app is actually beneficial or it's not beneficial? And how do we determine, honestly, at what point do we stop and decide, hey, at a certain point, when do we draw the line? And then one of my favorite scenes out of the movie, The Enemy of the State, which granted it's a Will Smith thing, but The Enemy of the State, where one of the characters says, well, who's going to be the monitor of the monitors of the monitors? It's just going to continue to go on and on and on. And we've already seen the fact that the government cannot hold itself back in the case of the FISA court and the FISA court's ability to go through and police itself. We already know that they are incapable of doing so. And so I honestly think, I mean, as much as I would love to see TikTok realistically be taken off of people's, especially kids, because I think there's a lot of TikTok stuff that's running around that are causing harm to our society. The reality of it is that we sort of have to find a way to inoculate our children and other people who are not as strong as some of us might be able to inoculate them to the evils that can happen within this particular situation when it comes to things like applications or social media outlets or whatever. And, so little interesting story from a personal experience from China. Company that I used to work for, we did a project over there, and the design that we created for this project, and without giving away too many details, required that we ended up having two separate, for those of you that don't know, just to kind of fill you in, I am a networking person by trade. So I do enterprise networks, computer networks. But we had to create two separate networks. One that was focused on just the company only. And the reason for that was because obviously the company was based here in the United States. And so they had privileged information that they did not want anybody spying on. But the second network, which was designed to provide a public access to information, had to be completely and utterly separate from the corporate network because of the fact that China restricts what their people can see and where they can go and what they can do. And you've seen this in articles across the globe. China has a very restrictive policy when it comes to certain things. In fact, when I was in the Chinese hotel, there was labels on the phone that says, be careful what you talk about while you're on this device or on any kind of phone, actually, because the government is examining all of those packets. They are collecting those packets, they're examining them, and they are listening to your phone calls. And even if you think that you have privacy in certain areas, you honestly, you don't. I mean, there's technologies that a lot of people talk about in terms of VPNs, for an example, which stands for a virtual private network. What it essentially is you're encrypting your internet traffic within a encryption tunnel that is then encrypted or decrypted on the other end and then sent out onto the internet. It's supposed to help hide your data. They work to an extent. But the fact of the matter is that even the National Security Administration, the NSA, I think I did that right, but even the NSA has algorithms to be able to break those encryptions. They have to, in order to be able to spy on foreign entities that are operating within our soil. We just can't expect that the government is going to police itself and be the honorable piece out of this, to not abuse this power. This clearly has been shown just even with just the Twitter files, which I've covered extensively on this show, that the Twitter files were an extension of the government getting a private non-governmental entity or non-governmental organization. They call them an NGO. They were using Twitter as a de facto extension of the government's arm in order to censor political speech and even speech about COVID, as an example, to censor that information from getting out to the rest of the general public. And what you're seeing now is you're seeing a reflection of that censorship. It's now coming back where people are like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize that, the Hunter Biden laptop existed and that it was real, and that, Hunter Biden actually did gather, and then Biden's actually did get money from the Chinese. Or you look at COVID, and COVID is like, the COVID vaccines. Oh, all of that. Well, first you weren't going to be able to get COVID if you got a vaccine, and that you could be running around in public without a mask on because you weren't going to transmit it. You weren't going to get it. And then come to find out that with COVID, you ended up finding out that, yes, you could actually transmit it. And by the way, you could actually even get it, even though you got the vaccine, which before COVID, getting a vaccine actually meant that you weren't going to, that a vaccine prevents you from getting it. Well, now they had to go and modify the definition of vaccine in order to say, well, vaccines actually don't prevent you from getting whatever the disease is. Anyway, the point here is that we have to be very, very cognizant and very, very careful with what we do with our laws, especially when it deals with our rights, in particular, rights like the First Amendment, the Second Amendment, so on and so forth. And to kind of give a little bit of information in terms of things like the Second Amendment, just to kind of make a segue to the next article. Recently, Washington State passed a law that prevented the sale and importation of what they considered quote unquote weapons of war. And it just recently went to Governor Inslee's desk. I affectionately call him Governor Idiot, but Governor Idiot's desk, and he signed it. Now, obviously, the very first thing that happened is as soon as he signed it, several groups have filed legal challenges for this. But this, once again, we're looking at the Restrict Act on a national level to be focusing on restricting free speech, okay? And here we have a state that is actually restricting weapons. Now, what's funny is the state constitution actually enshrines and supports the Second Amendment. So I'm really interested to see how this is going to play out. But they basically passed a law prohibiting the future sale of so-called assault weapons in Washington. And the new law, which was passed by the Evergreen State Democrat-led legislature, let's just face it, here in Washington, it's the cities, it's not the rest of the state. Same thing in California, same thing in Oregon. I've said it multiple times, but they passed it largely on a party line vote. And before it was approved by Jay Inslee or Jay Idiot, it bans the sale, manufacture, and importation of some 60 popular models by name, including the AK-47 in all forms, the AR-15, M16, and M4 in all forms. Now, going well beyond that list, by the way, the ban also applies to any semi-automatic rifle, pistol, or shotgun that has one or more of such common features as a pistol grip, a forward grip, a thumb hole stock, folding or telescoping stock, flash hider, flash suppressor, sound suppressor, muzzle brake, recoil compensator, or threaded barrel. It also bans the future sale of unassembled kits or a combination of parts from which an assault weapon can be assembled. Now, the final version does contain some exemptions for law enforcement and the military, of course, and it still allows, at least for now, possession of such firearms by people who already have them. Okay. However, those weapons cannot be legally transferred to anyone else. So in other words, someone who owns an AR-15 cannot sell it. Okay. Unless it is a family heirloom. Now, thankfully, the law is being challenged in court. Okay. And this was not unexpected. It's being challenged by a couple of different places, Washington-based Second Amendment Foundation, or the SAF, and Sacramento Firearms Policy Coalition. Even the NRA has thrown together a legal action as well. So one of the challenges, of course, with all of these things is because of the fact, number one, it is unconstitutional. I mean, let's just face it. The Second Amendment clearly states that there is nothing that they can do. But that being said, one of the things that has been clearly defined by the Supreme Court with all of these gun bans, gun restrictive laws, etc., in New York and Chicago and all of these other places, is that if you have a weapon that is in common use among legal gun owners, that it cannot be considered banned. And so that pretty much fits the AR-15. I mean, the AR-15 is one of the most common rifles in America today just by sheer sales. And so this is going to be interesting to watch. But once again, this is, restricting our constitutional rights in terms of owning guns and so on and so forth. There's the full article is actually there, but I fully expected as soon as I knew that he was going to sign it, I was like, oh yeah, that's going to be boom. It's going to be, presented against the court. The only thing that I can hope for is that the state court actually turns it back and essentially says, yeah, you know what? This is it. I mean, our Constitution enshrines the Second Amendment anyway. So this really, really doesn't make any difference. Well, there is a pushback on from a lot of people now. And ironically, some of it is coming from places that you would never expect in terms of understanding our constitutional rights. So, toward that end, take a look at this article. Also in the Epoch Times, actor Richard Dreyfuss. Now, I didn't know anything about his political stance or anything else, but this is kind of interesting. Richard Dreyfuss discusses the importance of teaching civics in American schools. Understanding the Constitution is necessary for good citizenship, Dreyfuss says. And here's the thing. That's why I partner with the Institute on the Constitution, because that is exactly what they want to do. It's a grassroots educational opportunity for people to understand the Constitution. That's why I have these as a part of my package, to help support the show. Yes. I mean, I do get a little bit of something off of this. I'm not going to lie. But at the same time, I promote it because I believe in the Constitution. I believe in the words of our founding fathers and our documents. And so Richard Dreyfuss is pushing for this kind of thing. And in the article, here's where it says, passive citizenship in America is a direct consequence of public schools not teaching about people's constitutional rights and the rules for governing the country enshrined in the Constitution, said actor Richard Dreyfuss. Dreyfuss, who won an Academy Award in 1978 for his leading role in The Goodbye Girl, has acted in other famous films such as What About Bob? That was hilarious. American Graffiti. That was good. Jaws. Well, we all know that one was good. Close Encounters of the Third Kind, and more. He spoke to the Epoch Times at Hunter College in New York City on May 2nd. Dreyfuss was at the college for a discussion about his book, One Thought Scares Me. People who have not been taught civics do not understand the power civil authorities have been given or the hierarchy of powers, said Dreyfuss, who has advocated for the need for civic education in the American school system since 2008 with his organization, the Dreyfuss Civics Initiative. Dreyfuss explained that it is too late to learn civics after a person gets elected to Congress. Now, this is part of the, I'm going to take a digression here from the article. This is part of the reason why I think one of the tests that we need to have for anybody who gets elected into a position, they have to pass a civil service, a civics exam before they can actually take office. Okay. Dreyfuss says you have to learn it and learn it so that it's in your DNA. And that's why you study the Constitution. In my personal opinion, this is what he said, but in my personal opinion and my personal thing, okay, is this. The Constitution and the Bible are probably the two most important books that anyone can learn, read, and understand in order to be able to navigate our society, our culture, and our social system. In conjunction with things like the Constitution, you also have to look at things like the Federalist Papers, the Anti-Federalist Papers, the Articles of Confederation, the Declaration of Independence. There is a score of other documents that we need to read and understand in order to be able to clearly get the full picture of what the founders meant for this country. And I've talked a little bit about it on this show. I've actually been called out on it by believe it or not, by a longtime listener who basically told me essentially that I've gotten away from the discussions that I have had on the Constitution. And so toward that end, I am going to let you know that one of the projects that I am working on moving forward is I am going to be including a weekly 15-minute segment within my show. I don't know if it's going to fall on Wednesday nights or Saturday nights, or if I'm going to use it when I use it to expand to a third night. But I am currently working on a segment that I'm going to call the Constitutional Quarter. And the Constitutional Quarter will be focused specifically on bits and pieces and parts of the Constitution itself. And it'll be a 15-minute conversation about certain segments of the Constitution. And I'm working on that. It will be coming in the near future. I can't really give you a date on it, but it will be coming in the near future. And so I've been, like I said, I've been called out on it. And that person, after I reflected on it, I realized that, yes, that person was right. And I really needed to get kind of back to that. So that's what's coming in the future. Like I said, don't know how far in the future it's going to be. I'm hoping to do it sometime in the next, let's say, month or less, to start that off. But I'm working on it, and I'm getting it done. So anyway, yeah. So the lack of civic studies, I mean, I've been telling people this all the time. I'm actually kind of surprised. My daughter is actually in a civics class in her high school right now, and she is actually really enjoying it. But the funny thing about that civics class, honestly, is that I've been kind of asking her questions about some of the things that they've been learning. And I'll be honest with you, I'm pleasantly surprised in this particular civics class that they are actually learning what I can consider as real civics, not the 1619 project civics, but the real civics. And so, yeah, it's going to be interesting. Like I said, I'm going to bring it in. Hopefully you guys will enjoy it. And, I'm hoping that it doesn't turn people off. But I mean, it is what it is. It's kind of what I sort of started to do, and I'm going to try and make sure and sort of push that forward. I've got to pay homage to to my start from this. And what I'm also planning on doing too is taking those 15-minute clips and separating them out and posting them separately as small, short, little 15-minute clips. And I'm actually even considering turning that into its own little podcast type deal. But anyway, that's future planning. So there you go. All right. So let me move on to another couple of things here. And okay, so let's move on to some topics in terms of the election. And in one case in particular, I remember how I was talking about the fact that DeSantis was sort of waiting to get that law changed where he didn't have to resign as governor in order to be able to run for president. Well, guess what? Now a report has come out. This is an article in Hot Air, but a report has come out that DeSantis will actually skip the exploratory committee process and potentially launch his full campaign next month. Now, I don't know if anybody caught it, but Tim Scott had an exploratory committee that he was putting together in order to explore a potential presidential run. And so now we have, DeSantis now is saying that he is going to skip the exploratory committee and launch his full campaign. So again, I mean, pretty much everybody kind of knew that he was going to do this. But I'm torn between this because, I mean, let's be honest with you. I do like Ron DeSantis. I do think he's, he would be a great president. But I really think he would be a great president from 2028 and 2032, not necessarily in 2024. And I've kind of made that clear. However, there are some questionable things that are going on with the Trump campaign. For an example, he kind of kowtowed and went to CNN as an example. He has also been throwing a whole bunch of mudslinging at Ron DeSantis, and he is not paying attention to where he should be paying attention, which is Joe Biden and the Democrats. So, at least Ron DeSantis has not gotten fully engaged with the mudslinging yet toward Donald Trump, but I'm sure once he does announce that will probably start back up, or start up, I should say. But anyway, now granted, this report is coming from NBC News. But he's, again, he's preparing. The reporter initially said he was preparing to jump in mid-May. But that's their kind of wishful thinking, I think. But anyway, so yeah, I just wanted to bring it up, because he's, reportedly going to skip the whole exploratory, committee, kind of thing. But anyway, so moving on to the other side of the aisle and Joe Biden. All right. Well, Joe Biden has decided to make women the key to his 2024 reelection plans. Now, folks, I got to say this. Anyone who is of the true biological female persuasion, doesn't matter if you are on the right side of the aisle, the left side of the aisle, the independent side of the aisle, so on and so forth. You have to realize what the left in particular is doing to you. And they're doing this supposedly in your name, because they think that this is positive. But if you look back at the last 2 years, there's not been a single biological woman who has been elected or awarded with a position in terms of special recognition. There has been a focus on trans women who are not biological women in sports. They are literally not, and I'm not, I mean, I hate using that word because to say that just sort of undermines the point that I'm attempting to make, but they are literally using the patriarchy as a weapon against biological women. And how biological women can stand by and allow this to happen. Think about this. You up until the last 5 years, you were in a protected space. Men could not go into things like your locker rooms. Men could not go into places like your restrooms. They would get arrested. It was illegal to be in those spaces. And now all somebody has to do, they don't even have to look the part. All somebody has to do, like myself, I decide just one day, you know what, today I'm going to take a page out of Shania Twain's book, and I'm going to say, man, I feel like a woman. And I get to walk into all of these spaces. I get to go in and shower and expose myself to, it doesn't even matter. I could expose myself to young girls. I can walk into a spa in LA, get buck naked in front of these women. I could even, believe it or not, I could even be walking around with being attracted to women with an obvious appendage showing, and none of that would make a difference. And yet, I do not hear a single outrage from any of the women who were walking around with the pink hats and calling Trump a misogynist pig when he was on tape saying stuff about how women throw themselves at him. And not a single one of these feminists are standing up and saying, you know what, this is wrong. Instead, they're actually applauding for this. Now, here's the thing. Biden obviously is focused on this. And I don't know if anybody remembers, but the Republicans put forth in the House a Protection of Women in Sports Act that was completely across party lines. They've been split right down party lines. Not a single Democrat voted to protect women in sports. And this isn't just protecting records. This is I'm talking about protecting things like in MMA, which obviously that you've seen the reports, you've seen the news reports how a trans woman has busted up orbital bones, has almost put these women, these biological women, in a hospital. This is absolutely, in my opinion, totally asinine. And I've made it a mission, I guess you could say, but to protect women from these these mental illnesses. I mean, it wasn't even 10 years ago that we had, gender identity disorder and gender dysphoria were part of the DSM-5. Even Vivek Ramaswamy, who is running for president, pointed that out. Okay. Now, all right, look, again, if you really are in that position, I've held this position multiple times, but if you're really in that position and you're an adult, obviously it's entirely up to you. But we definitely have to be very, very, very careful with allowing kids who are already influenced. I started off this episode talking about TikTok. I mean, somebody brought up the whole idea of the Tide Pods challenge. Anyone who could sit there and say, oh yeah, ingest a Tide Pod. I mean, come on. This has nothing to do with common sense and logic anymore. None of this does. And I'm getting frustrated not over the fact that it's happening. What I'm getting frustrated over is the lack of people who are willing to stand up and say, you know what, this is wrong. And we've had so many reports coming out from like prisons in California. There was an expose that was put together, I can't remember by who, recently, and that women were getting, assaulted in these spaces. They were turning up pregnant in these spaces by these supposedly trans men who, trans women who just identified as trans women. They were actually men who were going to prison for some sort of sexual deviant behavior, whether it was rape or molestation or something like that. And they just said, hey, you know what? I am a woman and you can't put me in with the men. And so what did they do? They got put in with the women. And now some of the women are speaking out now and saying, hey, guess what? I get stuck in a cell with this deviant and he comes in and rapes me at night and stuff like that. It's like, come on, folks. Let's throw a little common sense and logic into this thing. This is crazy. But the fact that women are going to go and support this man, Biden, who literally talks about trans women, this is just ridiculous. I don't even understand how this guy is even going to come close to winning this next election. I really don't. I just don't see it. Maybe, hopefully, I seriously hope that the women are just being quiet, that the biological women are just being quiet, and they will come out resoundingly against this guy. And let's assume that Trump actually even makes it, okay? Let's assume that Trump gets the Republican nomination. Do you really, really, really want to vote for Biden, who's just going to push more and more of this stuff on you? Or are you going to go ahead and vote for Trump, who may be a misogynist? I mean, he's I have absolutely no problem being a critic of him, but he gets in. I mean, what? And you end up with the choice of Biden in the last 2 years and Trump, which was 4 years of a lot less stuff. Seriously. I don't know. Anyway. All right, moving on. Okay, so then Biden also, another thing that Biden does is he has an EV push, which of course we all know about. He's been talking about EVs. He's been talking about replacing all gasoline engines. California has jumped on to this and everything else. Well, apparently this might be hurting him, believe it or not. Biden's EV push, this is an article in Town Hall, Biden's EV push is threatening his support among a crucial constituency. And what is that crucial constituency? Well, the United Auto Workers. Remember, good old Scranton kid, Joe Biden, the union guy. You know, he loves his unions. Well, apparently, the leader of the United Auto Workers Union says not enough has been done thus far to address his concerns over the administration's electric vehicle push. Okay. The federal government is pouring billions into the electrical vehicle transition with no strings attached and no commitment to workers. The EV transition is at a serious risk of becoming a race to the bottom. We want to see national leadership have our back on this before we make any commitments. This was the United Auto Workers president, Shawn Fain, said in an internal memo to members on Tuesday. Now, what a lot of people don't understand is China has actually really been working to corner the market on electric batteries, especially not just the manufacturer of the batteries themselves, but in terms of the mining of the minerals that go into the batteries, the cobalt, the lithium, I'm trying to think, zinc, I think is in there as well. And they have been going through and making strategic ties, an example of which is Afghanistan, and the Taliban over there, making strategic ties with places that mine these precious minerals. And it's those precious minerals that go into the electric vehicle batteries that make them big enough and strong enough to be able to actually push a vehicle, at 60 or 100 miles an hour or whatever. And this is something that a lot of people they're not comprehending the cross between these two actions. And so Joe Biden pushing electric vehicles, he is essentially pushing us as America directly into China's hands, because China has cornered the market, has really, really pushed to corner the market on this. And what's even worse about this whole thing is that, and this is another thing that people are not talking about when it comes to these things, is the fact that the U.S. itself is heading toward a power grid reliability crisis, according to the Energy Commissioner. Now, I've been talking about this on this program quite too many times. I've been basically saying, if you take a look at anything that California does, that is the future for America, should America continue to go down this path. And one of the things that consistently fails in California is their electric grid, because of the fact that the electric grid cannot handle the amount of insane push toward electric vehicles. An electric vehicle takes up the power, and don't quote me on this, but I've heard somewhere in the realm of like 2 AC units. And so I don't know if anybody has watched, but you'll see, during the summertime, you'll see reports coming out of California. Hey, folks, we need you to shut off your AC units at night. Now, I don't know about you, but Southern California can actually be sitting in the 80s at night when the sun goes down in the summertime, because of the fact that it raises, the all of the pavement and everything else that they have, it raises the temperature of that in the valley. And then you deal with things like, for an example, you'll deal with things like solar power that California has pushed and been like, hey, we're going to be total green. We're going to do solar power. Well, you can't do solar power if the sun is not shining on those solar panels. Hey, we're going to do wind. What happens when the wind stops blowing or pauses even just for a couple of days? I mean, I've said it before on this program. I was doing a job for a local electric power company, and it was out at a hydroelectric dam. Everybody would think, oh, hydroelectric, this is absolutely awesome. And so I asked a couple questions. I was like, hey, how much power do we have that we keep here in the state, within the state, that comes from this hydroelectric dam? And he pretty much pointed out, and this is true, you can check this, but he pretty much pointed out that the hydroelectric dams are not the primary source of power. Same thing with the wind farms, because they also have wind farms. I did some work out at the wind farms as well, and I asked the same question. How much of our regular power comes from these wind farms? And the fact of the matter is that the hydroelectric and the wind were supplemental systems for the standard electric power plants that were run on coal, natural gas, and oil, fossil fuels, in other words. Now, we also had in this state, nuclear power at one point, and a lot of that goes away. But just the fact of the matter is that our electric grid right now, even California has to buy. They buy from neighboring states. They purchase a lot of their additional electricity from places like Nevada and Oregon and Washington. And so this whole push for electric vehicles is not good. Now, don't get me wrong. If we can develop green energies in order to strike a balance between our fossil fuel usage and green energies, I can see a push for that. But to go and just push for one or the other completely and to like discount anything else, to me, is a little ridiculous. It's just crazy to even think of. But our reliability on our grids, I mean, we do have aging grids over here. We really do. Now, in the piece here, there were approximately 10,000 energy projects in April designed to produce more than 2,000 gigawatts of collective power, waiting for permits from the federal and state agencies to connect to electrical grids across the United States. The problem is that is nearly twice the collective electricity output of the 1,250 gigawatts now being produced by all of the nation's power plants. Most of them were built to generate power using fossil fuels. Therefore, two bottlenecks are looming. One, more power is trying to squeeze into an inadequate grid, and coal-fired plants are being retired faster than new plants using renewable energy sources such as wind and solar are being built to replace them. The United States is heading for a reliability crisis. Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, FERC, Commissioner Mark Christie warned on May 4th in a hearing before the Senate Energy and National Resources Committee. Christie said, "I do not use the term crisis for melodrama, but because it is an accurate description of what we are facing. I think anyone would regard an increasing threat of system-wide extensive power outages as a crisis." Committee Chair Joe Manchin, Senator from Democrat from West Virginia, and ranking Republican Senator John Brasso from Wyoming, he's a Republican, agreed, both identifying the same culprit in an impending but avoidable reliability crisis that confronts the nation's electricity grid. Okay, folks, I'm just going to point out to you, California is the bedrock place for this. Okay. Yeah, it's just not going to happen. And like Bonnie says right here over on Facebook, or Benita, I should say, says, we cannot just end fossil fuels. Brilliant ones aren't very smart. You are correct. We can't just end fossil fuels and start picking up elsewhere. We just can't do it. I mean, as much as what these folks, even with the electricity that you charge with, it comes from fossil fuels. So all you're essentially doing is moving you're passing the buck, basically. You're moving the responsibility from being here in America to elsewhere. Same thing with the electric batteries. You talk about, the emissions coming from the gasoline engines. Well, how about all of the emissions that are coming from mining and all of the damage that's being done to the earth through those mining and all of the people who are being mined? I don't know if you've ever seen those pictures, but you'll look and see photos, and they are sitting there watching, looking at you, and they're mining cobalt as early as like 5 years old. You can't tell me that is good for the environment or even good for the people. So, I mean, anyway, this whole green agenda, in my mind, while it might be good eventually for us to get there, we're not even close to being there, to be honest with you. And so, yeah, it's just a mess. All right, so I'm scanning through here. We've got a couple other things that I wanted to talk about. Let's see. Okay. Yeah, let me go ahead and just do this. All right. So tonight for questions for whiskey, I've actually got 2 of them, and I'll get that here in just a second. But before I do, I wanted to bring this up. Everybody talks about technology and how technology has made, our lives better. It's made us more efficient. It's made us all this other stuff. It's just, people just love technology. Okay. Well, you have the invention of, say, ChatGPT, which is an AI, potentially an AI, but there have been several articles about GPT being very left wing and refusing to answer certain questions when it comes to putting, conservatives into a positive light. Okay. Same thing when it comes to things like Google. Everybody knows that Google, or the alphabet company, which owns YouTube, is very much a left-wing organization. We've seen all the big tech companies like Twitter and Facebook and so on and so forth. But no one has ever really talked about Microsoft and search engines. Well, a new report apparently came out, and it's pretty scathing, but the media solutions company, All Sides, conducted a new analysis over a 2-week period from March 9th to 22nd of 2023 and found that a whopping 83% of news articles displayed on Bing's news homepage were from media outlets on the left. Now, we sit and we wonder, I have actually asked the question. I'm like, God, why is it that these people, whether it's on social media or when you're in conversations or, even interpersonal conversations, why is it that these people are just so much against the actual truth as to what's going on? Well, here's part of the problem. You have Google, you have Bing, which, by the way, Bing was because it's not Google. That's where they came up with the name Bing, because it's not Google. But you have all of these outlets. The left has taken over everything for the most part when it comes to outlets and media outlets, informational outlets, everything, all kinds of stuff, which is why it's hard for us to find mainstream media outlets that actually report on the truth. I personally think myself that, places like the Epoch Times is middle of the road. All right. There's other outlets. I really feel like the Daily Wire is going to make a big splash when it comes to things like putting together conservative media, conservative movies, conservative content for consumption. You have Rumble, which I transmit on gladly, who talks about free speech alternatives to YouTube. That's how they came out. And so we have got to retake our media consumption. We have to retake over the airwaves. And this is part of the reason why independent outlets are being pushed so bad, like, Dan Bongino as an example, Mark Levin as an example, Mark Kay as an example. We've got to get more people like that. And Rush was fantastic of an option when it comes to everything. In fact, he was so good that they had to form National Public Radio in order to try and combat him. But the reality of it is that the areas and places that we as conservatives can go to get true facts and true information is shrinking. And we have got to promote and help support all of those other alternative outlets, places where people can go to get what is essentially the correct truth. Because otherwise, if the media gets completely controlled, everything, then we're looking at essentially the Ministry of Truth. And that's what we're going to be looking at, is something like that. We have got to support those out there who are willing to lend their voices to the truth and to the honesty and everything else. Now, I personally use Brave. And I only go to other search engines when I need to, if I don't get satisfactory results, because unfortunately, even places that are more neutral, like DuckDuckGo or Brave or somebody like that, is going to be essentially leaning, unfortunately, because they may not be as well developed as some of these other ones that are out there. So don't expect to just jump to another search engine to be able to go and get the same results. However, you have to use, unfortunately, you have to use a little bit of common sense and understanding in terms of what you're dealing with to be able to go and get the information that you're looking for. So again, I use Brave. I use Brave as a browser. It is based off of Google Chrome, but I use it as a browser. And I use it as well, use their search engine on like my Firefox, for an example. If I can't use Brave, I use Firefox for my browser. And those two are particularly my favorites in terms of that. In fact, all of these that you're seeing, all of this imagery and stuff that you're seeing behind me, that's all being done on Brave as a browser at the moment. So just so you're aware of that. Okay. All right. So last things, of course, let's go and get on to tonight's last segment of the night, Questions for Whiskey. All right. And tonight's question for whiskey, it's actually, like I said, there's two of them. The first one comes from a fellow Rumbler. Goes by the screen name of 3 Chevy. 3 Chevy writes, "Hey, Rick, now that all the writers are on strike, who is going to write speeches for President Biden?" I had to throw this in there just because I thought it was funny. Okay, so everybody, maybe not everybody knows about this, but there is a writer's strike going on in Hollywood right now. And personally, I actually think that's a perfect thing for them. I think that the writer's strike, I hope it goes on for a very long time because it will give, alternative outlets or even be like myself, where I go back and, I don't think I've seen anything as far as like recent media in a long time. In fact, last night I watched Smokey and the Bandit as a movie, and that could be, much less politically correct than most. But it was great entertainment and I actually loved it. So anyway, as far as like who's going to write the speeches for Biden, I don't know. Maybe they'll get Kamala to do it. I mean, she's just such a great, eloquent speaker that I just like, yeah, she would be amazing. And of course, she actually called Joe Biden, believe it or not, she called him a coworker. A coworker. Yeah, you're right, 3 Chevy. Bandit 2 probably wasn't exactly, that wasn't like the best movie at all. It really tanked. But the original one, the Smokey and the Bandit original, that was good. All right. So the second question, which is a little bit more serious, this comes from Buddy Weiser. And he says, is it possible for Congress to override a presidential veto? And if so, how does this happen? Okay. So especially dealing with things like the budget proposal and so on and so forth that's coming up here pretty soon, there is the option, and this is where I would highly suggest that you break out your Constitution. And if you read under Article 1, or sorry, is it Article 1? Yes, it's Article 1, Section 7, Clause 2, which reads, every bill which shall have passed the House of Representatives and the Senate shall, to become a law, be presented to the President of the United States. If he approves it, he shall sign it. But if not, he shall return it with his objections to the House in which it shall have originated, who shall enter the objections at large on their journal and proceed to reconsider it. If after such reconsideration, 2/3 of that House shall agree to pass the bill, it shall be sent together with the objections to the other House, by which it shall likewise be reconsidered. And if approved by 2/3 of that House, it shall become law. All right. So here's basically what this is saying is that if the president decides that he's going to veto the bill, he will send it back to whichever House it originated in. So if it's originally a House bill that got passed to the Senate and the Senate approved it, and then they said, yep, we agree with you, and they send it on to the president, and the president vetoes it, it goes back to the House of Representatives first for them to reconsider. Now, the key here is that the president has to include his objections to it. Okay. So what ends up happening here is that the Constitution basically states that in order for something to become law, it technically has to be approved by the president. Okay. If the president decides he doesn't want to do it, he can veto it and send it back. Now, when they send it back, each House, meaning the House of Representatives and the Senate, has to have a 2/3 majority. Now, here's the key, though. And this is where this says 2/3 majority, but it doesn't actually specify what that 2/3 means. Does it mean 2/3 of the entire House? Does it mean 2/3 of the entire Senate? Can we get to 2/3 with like maybe almost, but not quite 2/3 of the House versus almost not quite 2/3 of the Senate, but combined they come up to 2/3? Well, cases like this have gone up in front of the Supreme Court. And the latest or the last time that this was really argued, because realistically vetoes don't happen very often. But one of the things that has been qualified by the Supreme Court is essentially that the 2/3 rule means however many, in terms of as long as the House or the Senate or both, in this case, has a quorum, it is a 2/3 of said quorum, not actually 2/3 of each. Now, yes, both houses have to have 2/3 of the voting members who were present at the time that they reconsidered it. Okay. 2/3 of each house is what it takes to override the veto. And this is part of the reason why you hear the concept of supermajority. Because realistically, and especially in today's day and age where we have, two political parties that are essentially at each other's throats, if you don't have a 2/3 majority in your house, then the chances of overriding a veto is pretty slim. In this particular case, for an example, the House Republicans don't have a 2/3 majority in the House of Representatives. The Senate, definitely, we're in almost a 50-50 split. So there is absolutely no mathematical way, realistically, that either house would be able to override a President Biden veto. Now, there is another concept that is out there with regards to the veto, and that's what's called the pocket veto. Now, the pocket veto actually is kind of a little bit of an underhanded thing if you read it and you understand how it happens. So the key here is that the president has, and it's been defined, has 10 days from the time that he has a bill presented to him or her that to basically either veto it or sign it, or they have a third option. And the third option basically means that he just doesn't sign it, but he also doesn't send his objections back to the House. Now, in that particular case, if the president just sort of ignores it and doesn't respond to it at all, it actually becomes law. So if the president doesn't respond within that 10 days, he actually approves of it by the Constitution and by the law. But the pocket veto is a little underhanded. The pocket veto is essentially that if Congress goes and let's say they present the bill 5 days before they adjourn, okay? And it doesn't even have to be the whole of Congress. It's just whichever house, like the Senate or the House of Representatives, because each one of them adjourn slightly differently, okay? So if the bill gets presented to the president, it gets signed, and he, 2 or 3 days, they and one of the houses of Congress adjourns for that session. Then the president vetoes it after that adjournment. That's called a pocket veto. And the reason why is because it actually makes it so that you can't, once adjourned, they can't get called back. So if they adjourn and the president vetoes it, then it literally becomes no law. It will not become a law under that circumstance based on the way previous things have been put out. And unfortunately, it doesn't go into this kind of detail within the Constitution, but this is sort of how things have been said and interpreted by a lot of lawyers, is the fact that if a bill gets presented and the president vetoes it and one of the houses have adjourned by that time, then it literally doesn't become a law because they can't get enough to override that veto. And so the purpose of this is to make sure that the legislature doesn't get too powerful and that the president also doesn't get too powerful by the idea of the veto. But again, keep in mind, they have to have 2/3 of each house in order to override whatever veto the president is going to give. So it's kind of tough, and it doesn't really happen as often as what people think. Most of the time, the president will go ahead and sign it into law. but sometimes they can use it as political leverage to sort of push the idea that, hey, I don't like this bill the way it's written, and so I'm going to veto it, which Biden has already said he's going to veto any kind of a budget that comes across his desk already if they don't negotiate. And so, yeah, so this is, it's sort of ingenious in a way because this is part of the checks and balances that you learn about in school. But there are some nuances to it that not a lot of people really and truly understand. And so it's kind of interesting to watch and see it actually in action. But anyway, all right. Hopefully that answered your questions, your 2 questions. And do me a favor, that actually is my final Whiskey Musings thought. So do me a favor, if you enjoy the program and you haven't already, please head on over to Rumble. Sign up for an account. It's free as in no charge to you. Sign up for an account and go to my Whiskey Musings Broadcast channel and go ahead and hit follow. I've got 551 right now there. And I also have over on Facebook, because I can't forget them, I'm at 579 followers on Facebook. I am almost to 580. I'd really love to see more. Please. And obviously I have a big push toward Rumble. Rumble is a favorite, but I will continue on Facebook as well. And enjoy the rest of your weekend. And we'll see you next time, Wednesday night, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific, right here on the Whiskey Musings Broadcast. Good night, everybody.
The Whiskey Musings Broadcast is produced by Active Eye Media, LLC. All rights reserved.